Welcome to today's episode of Moving Beyond Manis and Pedis with Robin, Alicia, and Sharonda. On today's podcast, our topic of discussion is defining and practicing intentional self care for social workers. The importance of what self care is a major topic of discussion. But the concern and the problem is there is no clear definition as to what self care is and what self care isn't. That's what we're going to talk about. We have two amazing guests that will be on that will talk to us a little bit about their self care journey. They'll give some advice on how we can effectively and efficiently practice self care for our new social workers and those in the helping field, and also for our seasoned social workers. Stay.
Hi, everybody. So this portion of the podcast is looking at the literature review that we did. We did this to obviously guide our questions for our panel guests, as well as inform us on which directions we wanted to take the podcast. So basically, the criteria we used was self-care, social work, burnout. Those were the three main criteria we looked for in our search, which we used Google Scholar on the Simmons Library, and the EBSCO search engine popped up. So basically about 50 to 60 articles popped up, and we chose to use 13 of those articles that best met what we were thinking about. From those articles, 4 themes emerged from the research around self-care and social work. And the first one being basically that self-care is an ethical issue, and social workers need to see it that way and think about it in those ways. In 2021, which was only a couple of years ago, the NSAW actually did put add self-care into our code of ethics. So it's really recent. I think it probably grew out of a lot of what was happening with COVID and the burnout, and really thinking and connecting self-care to being an effective social worker. By the way, all these themes that emerged, each one of them could be their own podcast, which is kind of interesting to think about breaking them down and really diving into each theme. But for these purposes, the second theme that emerged was the critical role that social work education plays in developing self-care for up and coming and new therapists. I think most of us, or many of us who have been educated, never ever took a course on self-care or even was part of our journey. So there was a lot of emphasis on the research around how to really bring this into social work education, especially now that it's considered an ethical obligation. The third trend that I could find, or we found, in the research was the idea of macro level impacts on social workers, capitalism, the business model, the reduction in resources, limited resources, managerialism, all these models that I think any of us who've worked in an agency or working under more clients, less time, documentation, only using evidence-based type models instead of like being able to implement things that we would maybe want to, or have more time as well to work on our programs, our treatments, and with our clients. So within that realm, also there were a couple articles that really delved into the structural racism that occurs and how that really impacts BIPOC social workers. And there's a definite gap in the literature about that voice and those needs being met. So, and then finally, which is I think what most of us think about when we think about self-care, is in how do we implement it, clinical practice. So the bulk of the articles that we found were on strategies for implementation and accountability. I'm quickly going to bring up and hopefully share my screen. Hold on. Something that we felt was kind of important to share with everybody. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. Sorry. Quickly. Here it is. Okay. And I'm going to share, and that's why I'm on Zoom here. But basically, what this is the self-care wheel. And this came up in the literature, and I thought it was really significant, as did the rest of my colleagues here in our podcast. So just, again, something to think about is when we're talking about intentional self-care and social work, we're looking at these various areas: psychological, emotional, let's lift this up a little, spiritual, personal, professional, and physical. And you can see there's many. Give you a second to kind of hopefully just look at those a little bit. But it's really, again, about work-life balance, which I know definitely has come up in this podcast. And just knowing that there are multiple resources out there for us as social workers, and that the literature, though, basically was saying there's a big gap in, there's a lot to be learned. So that's where we are. Thanks.
Oh, hey you, how are you? Let's talk a little bit about self care. Are you practicing? Are you doing what you need to do for you to live the best version of yourself that you can be? Let me tell you, I am. I had to. I was slowly but surely killing myself from the inside out every day, giving everything to everybody and putting myself last, not taking care of my physical, emotional, spiritual, or financial health any day of the week. But 2 years ago, something happened. I began to care about me. I began to say, it's okay for me to take time to take care of myself to ensure that I had a long and healthy life. So let me tell you, physically, I began to move and made sure I moved at least 45 minutes every day. And I'm up to 116 pounds lost. I worked on my spiritual health. I made sure that I was having a spiritual connection with my special person and my being in my life. I worked on my financial health. I began a savings account to save money for those rainy days, to save money for trips, to save money for my children, to save money for myself. And lastly, I took care of my emotional health. What did that look like for me? It looked like beginning counseling sessions to make sure that as good as I was looking on the outside, I wanted to feel as good on the inside. Work through childhood and emotional traumas that I've been through. So I'm just letting you know, self-care is more than just Manny and Pedis. It's what you need. It's very individualized. Make sure you take the time to take care of you. Have an amazing day.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We just want to start out with some introductions of our interviewees. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We have Ms. Lauren Morris. Lauren is currently with Centera Healthcare Population Health, where she is a medical social worker. She has a background with BSW from East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina, and a master's in social work from North Carolina State University. And Ms. Eileen Edmondson, thank you so much for joining us. Eileen is currently a nurse in the emergency department of Cape Fear Valley Medical Center in Fayetteville, North Carolina. She also has a bachelor's degree in social work from Methodist University in Fayetteville, North Carolina, her master's degree in social work from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and went back for her bachelor's in nursing at Methodist University. So welcome to both of you, and thank you again so much for your time and expertise regarding our subject matter, moving beyond manis and petties and defining and practicing intentional self-care for social workers. So, is there anything else you'd like to share with us regarding your background?
I will say that, and it's certainly along the lines of self-care as well. I actually had taken it a journey into getting my yoga teaching certification. And found very much that in seeking out that for my own self-care, that was a great opportunity for me to incorporate that into my social work practice. So truly, like, social worker will find any kind of way to put their personal stuff in and make their whole life about social work. So that's definitely something that I also took upon my journey as well.
Wonderful.
And for me, I don't have much.
Irene, anything?
I don't have much in the way of a life. And I'm not technologically savvy. I'm a cat lady, and I've got 3 teenagers. That's about it.
That's great. All right, so
Wonderful.
how about I jump right in and start with our questions for you guys? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So anyway, going back to social work, what led you guys, and feel free, whoever wants to start us out, what led you to make the career decision to become a social worker? And if you can remember, what were your expectations?
So I remember pretty clearly when I started getting into social work. Well, I was actually just trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, what path I was being led toward. And I actually found a huge interest in mental health and just learning more about mental health, and interviewed an LCSW who actually happened to be a friend's mom. And I was absolutely hooked after that. My expectations moving into that were the ability to learn more about what drives people, the different needs that people have, the reasons that we maybe take a course of action over another one, how to meet people where they are. That was very much my expectations of it. And although sometimes in my career, that's not really, I've not seen my role live up to that. That's always been sort of the route, trying to come back to that for me.
Great, thanks.
For me, it all very similar to nursing as well. I knew I wanted to help people. I saw obviously a gigantic need. There are so many people that just are needing both mental health as well as the more kind of concrete services of, safe housing, safety in their relationships, help raising their children, like parenting skills, that kind of thing. So I was just always really driven to help people, and figured social work was a pretty good way to reach them however they needed.
Great.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much. So when you think back to when you first became a social worker, maybe even before you became a social worker, what did self-care look like to you? At the beginning, we gung-ho, we're going to change the world because we got our degree and we're going to make life wonderful. Was there any practices you were doing at that time that focused in on self-care?
I mean, I've always been a reader, and just hanging out with my kids. We like to bowl, playing with my cats. I'm a very simple person.
Love that. Awesome. Thank you, Lauren.
While I was actually getting my BSW, I started learning how to crochet, and that was a self-care practice that I took. From it, I took a lot of sort of life lessons as well. One of my favorite ones is, if you make a mistake, you just rip back what you were doing and start over from the beginning. So I took away some lessons from that. But I will say that some of my mentors, as I was getting my BSW, were very much along the lines of, get a massage, that's good self-care. And well, I did find that was useful advice at the time. As I grew, I found that was maybe not always going to be sufficient for self-care, but so definitely an evolution of that.
Absolutely.
Funny, I think that's why we came up with this idea, because we're talking about intentional self-care, right? And I think that's a great example of what you just said. It's like just advice, but is it intentional? And is it helpful in the way that we need it to be as social workers?
Absolutely. Thank you.
So ladies, how would you define burnout? I mean, we can look up Webster's definition of what that is, and not necessarily just yet defining what it means to you, but overall, how would you define burnout?
I think if I were to use the most broad sort of comprehension of it, I would go to that sympathetic nervous system. And that for me, defining burnout would be that sympathetic nervous system is never getting a rest, that it is always turned on, that the stress cycle never actually completes, that we're always in the middle of that stress cycle, and that being in that stress cycle leads us to not really being a functional individual, be it in career, personal life, or other areas as well.
Lauren, that's great. Even as you were talking, I was processing myself. I can remember before I started being actively intentional on my self-care journey that I never dreamed. I never felt rested after I woke up. And it makes sense to me if it's connected with my nervous system and connected with my internal body wasn't able to calm down. That's an amazing point. Thank you for sharing.
Can I also add,
And
Sharon,
Eileen, I
that,
know you. Oh,
sorry, one sec, I just wanted to add to that, in that it reminds me of like talking about DPAR and how we're looking at things in a different way. It's how communities get burnt out, how a larger group get burnt out, and we're not necessarily even thinking about that when we're working with our clients, and then their burnout, we feel it. So like bringing it back to like even a more macro level of how that happens and how we have to think about things, I think is important. But I'm sorry I interrupted, Alicia. Go.
you're fine. I was going to say, Eileen, I know that you see burnout on a regular basis, medically, in the emergency room, multiple professionals that you're dealing with on a daily basis. So how would you define burnout at this point?
To me, it's like your cup is just emptied out. You've given all of your your cares out to the world, and you've just got nothing left either for yourself or for the next crisis that comes through the door. It's like a gas tank. I've burned out all my gas, and now there's another 10 miles I have to drive because 10 more people just walk through the door, and I just don't have anything else to give them. I'm just done. I'm just empty. I'm just like, you know what? You can go take your problems elsewhere because I'm out. I'm done. I have nothing else to give. I'm out. So,
Right.
Eileen, with a follow-up
Thank you so
question.
much.
I'm sorry, Alicia. We just jumping in here in the middle of the interview.
We've all got stuff to say.
But I love what Lauren and Eileen are saying. I was just wondering, Eileen, since you've been in the social work field and in the medical field, does burnout look different, you think, between social workers and like the medical professionals, or is it about the same? What do you think?
I think it's easier to hide the burnout in the medical side of it than it is the social work side, because the social work side is so much more the like connecting with the person, like on a more meaningful level. Medical, if you're burned out in the medical field, you can just be, straightforward. You just have a very no nonsense bedside manner. You can give them the pills and do what you need to do, and then you can leave the room.
Yeah.
Because social work is more of like connection person to person. When you're burned out, it's a lot harder to hide that because you're not adding your side of the connection. Absolutely. And they can tell you're not really in it. You're just here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. I didn't look at it from that perspective, but you're right. As a social worker, you're working with people, it could be long term, like for a while. And when you get overwhelmed, you can't just stop. You can't just like, I'm gonna put this on the shelf and I'll do it another time. It's like, nope, I got to go back tomorrow and I got to go back Thursday. And so I definitely could see that perspective and how, in the medical is like, okay, I'm gonna identify it. I'm gonna give you what you need. I'm gonna move on to the next, and not having the luxury of that part of it in the social work field. Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you. Alicia, back to you. Sorry.
Awesome, ladies. I really am enjoying so far, but we're going to pause at this moment for a short self-care commercial break. Hi, and I hope you're enjoying our self-care podcast. This is my self-care commercial. So, burnout. I've experienced it, I felt it, and I've grown from it. I realized as a director for a local government agency that I had to change some things about what I was doing. I had grown to about 375, almost 400 pounds, injured myself because I've had a lifelong journey of a weight loss struggle. And I started seeking mental health treatment. The process of weight loss surgery caused me to seek the mental health because that's a requirement for surgery. I had the gastric sleeve in 2015, and it forever changed my life. It's a tool that I've used to lose weight, but also focus on my self-care. It brought some things to the light that I needed to realize that I was supporting the world inside my house and outside my house. I was taking care of many people, but I wasn't taking care of me. And so the one thing that our group has had in common is that struggle with weight and learning to ultimately start focusing on ourselves. No more manis and pedis as usual. We can't just let it stop there. From financial, self-care, career advocacy, self-care, and our physical and mental well-being. We have to look at our whole selves and figure out what we need to fuel ourselves, to keep ourselves going. The very advice that we give our patients and our clients, we have to take that advice for ourselves and realize that in order for us to be at the top of our game and truly help the people we seek to serve, we're going to have to help ourselves. So, hope you're enjoying the podcast because we have thoroughly enjoyed preparing it.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So to continue our discussion, and I think this is an important kind of very personal, on a personal level, and we're looking forward to hearing this, but what was your rock bottom, or was there a moment in time where you had to say to yourselves, I need to take care of myself, and thinking about what a self-care transition was for you? Either one of you. Lauren, how about you?
So I think when I hear rock bottom, I definitely don't feel that I've hit that in my life. I've always had this mindset of seeing that it could get worse. So I don't think that I would identify with hitting rock bottom, but I will say that I recognize after working in case management for about 4 years in the hospital system, I started to take on a lot of what I was seeing with my clients, and I held a lot of that stress, the disappointment, the sadness. I had a lot of trouble letting that go. And so, I believe the clinical term is transference, was happening there. So I took that time to really address what was happening. But I would say that is probably the experience with burnout that I found. And like Eileen had mentioned earlier, you can't hide that. That's not something that you can mask. It comes out in every time you interact with a client.
Right. I think that's like what we'd call that secondary trauma as well. Like,
yes,
and that, what do we do with that? It's very difficult as social workers. It's unique to us in a way as what we do as in our profession. How about you, Eileen? Any moment that just hit for you?
It wasn't like one singular thing, but it was like I was noticing more and more I didn't have any like empathy left for my children. When I'd get home at the end of the day, I'd get home and they'd be complaining about something, and I just my instinct would just be like, you know what, that's your problem. I've been dealing with these people's real problems all day, and I come home and you've got this mild problem, and it's just figure out a way to deal with it. It's like I wasn't able to be there for my kids because I was just so wrung out from dealing with like I did medical social work as well, and just like that one, you come home from a case where the parent has abused their child and the child has died, and you have to process that and get through the day, and then you come home and your kid's complaining because they can't find the pencil they like, and it's like it's like it's that making that transition and not taking out my grief and frustration and stuff on my own children to basically penalize them.
So I'm curious. So you is that a moment where you decided I can't do this anymore, and for my self-care, I need to change into nursing?
Yeah. I switched. Not only I stopped being a social worker, I also quit working pediatrics, because if there's an adult that dies, it's sad, but it's not that like piece of yourself like it is with children. It's just that dealing with children. If the adult's in the hospital, they probably did something to, to add to themselves being there, versus the children. There's that level of, you want to protect them in a way you don't feel the need to protect as much as an adult. So
and that's that sounds like it's part of your self-awareness, right? That you felt that way about adults versus children, and that protective drive coming in. Definitely, I think it's really important as part of it, is that self-awareness of what it is that, because it's unique to all of us and individuals.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, like, even when you think of our code of ethics, like, I think it's phenomenal that our ethics has updated to add self-care. Like, to me, that was the most appropriate use of what we should be implementing ethically, because you have to think, like, when we struggle with our self-care, then we go into other ethical issues. Are we doing harm to our clients? Like, what does that look like? And it's unintentional. Like, it really is. It's like you want to do the best that you can, but you literally hit like the top level of what you can do. And then we go into an ethical dilemma. And so having self-care there, it just reinforces how important it is. It reinforces do I need to be self-aware right now and look and see what's going on with me? And do I need to make some changes for myself? And I think, ethically, you being able to figure that out and being able to implement it is just really important. And so both of what you shared was just really great information. So if you think back to when you first became a social worker and you remember all of the expectations you knew about and you didn't know about, or you think about the responsibilities and the ability to manage everything you needed to do in the day, and you think about self-care. Now think about those new social workers that's coming out, those interns, right? They're so excited. They're like, oh, I've learned all this great information and now I want to implement it. What advice would you give them as a seasoned social worker who's had those experiences and have that knowledge base? What advice would you provide to those the newbies?
Get a good team. Get a good self-care team around you, people that can listen to you just vent and won't judge you for your less than flattering thoughts that you might have about, interactions that you've had.
Absolutely. That's good, Eileen. When you think about the team you're talking about, because I agree with you, it's definitely who you surround yourself with and who creates that safe space that you feel comfortable. Because you're right, sometimes you want to be like, I want to be super strength-based right now, but I'm not strength-based right now. And you don't want to be judged for that. Do you think it's hard to develop what that team looks like? Like, how do you think somebody could find the right people?
To me, it was going outside of the social field to find people, because I felt like I was trying to self-censor, because you don't want to come out and say, I just wanted to, to throttle this parent that hurt their kid, because then it's like, but you're a social worker. You're supposed to be caring 100% all the time. And it's like going to a mommy group when you want to complain about your kid. It's like that may not be the best place. They're going to judge you as like, but you're supposed to be 100% of the time. And so people who don't work in that field, I found, were a lot more empathetic. Like, yeah, that job must be really hard. They listened better than the ones that are supposed to understand it from the inside.
It's so interesting that you say that, Eileen, because like you ended up leaving the profession. And I just heard like you didn't get what you needed from the people that were supposed to help you and be your clinical supervisor, for example, who should be able to take that in and help you. And, part of the research literature was all about how clinical supervision should be in that role. And we lost you because you didn't get what you need. So I think it's a really significant point, what you just said, that you did go look outside the field. And that says a lot about what the changes are that we need to do as a profession, especially with younger or newer up and coming therapists. So I really appreciated that.
And as we transition to Lauren, I just want to point out that's even more reason why people need the self-care, because the circle that you tried to make probably was burnt out too, probably was overwhelmed and couldn't be empathetic, couldn't be able to implement those social work skills that we would hope they could. So that was an awesome point. Lauren, what do you think?
Well,
I did kind of want to weigh in on that from what Eileen shared. And I think this is an interesting that you had that perspective. I can count on one hand the amount of close friends that I have, that I really have on my inner supportive circle. There's 3 of them that are social workers. The majority are social workers. And I really feel that when I was under a lot of duress and a lot of stress in my role, I did find support with people that were social workers. So that may have made a difference in the reason that I found that this was more my career path and that I stayed with it. I think if I were to give advice, it would definitely be to find that support system that you can trust, but also to not be afraid to say, I don't know the answer to that, and not be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
Those are 2, like, I think they kind of go hand in hand. But that is, when we're brand new social workers, we're going to save the world. We are gung-ho, everything. We can do it all. We could take on massive systems and topple everybody. Yes, we're angels, all of us. And when we get into it, and it's not that easy, and we don't have all the answers, it can feel daunting and it can feel overwhelming. And it's okay to say that we don't have the answers.
That's great, Lauren. And I agree with you 100%. I mean, I remember being a new social worker and I'm like, oh my God, now that I have this degree, I'm going to make so many changes in the world. And people realized that I was like that. So they piled the work on me, right? It was like, oh, if she's excited, I'm going to give her everything that she needs. And at the time, I wasn't practicing self-care. So it became overwhelming. And I started seeing it manifest in my body and in my mind and all those type of things. And I had to learn it was okay for me to say no too. Like, it was okay. It didn't make me less of a social worker, or it didn't make me less compassionate or less empathetic. It meant that I was being realistic about what I could really handle, and being able to, 1, say, I don't know, let me find out. And then 2, saying, now I think I can take that on. So that's great.
That's something I'm still working on, Sharon.
It's hard.
It's saying, please don't give me more. I'm overwhelmed already. So that can be a lifelong practice in itself, learning and reminding yourself that it's okay to say no.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, and then we'll move on to the next one. I went to a training that was called It's Not My Monkey. And sometimes when you go to training, you just be like, okay, let me just go to this and get done with it. And I was in management at the time, and it was so life-changing for me. So basically the point of the training was to not take on other people's issues or concerns and still be able to support them. And so I ended up buying these little magnetic monkeys. I would keep them on my desk. And when people would come and try to give me their stuff, I said, oh, give you this monkey, but I'll be glad to support you. And when I mean, it was like a breath of fresh air, and it was hard at first, but I promise you now, it is very easy for me to say, oh, I'm so sorry you're going through that. Let me see how I can give you a support. And I'll be glad to, be a sounding board, but I can't do it for you. So that was,
I got to get some monkeys, Sharon.
Yeah, you got to get some monkeys, put them on your desk. Thank you.
All right, ladies. So I heard you all mention just learning to say no, and setting proper boundaries and priorities is also important as it pertains to self-care and burnout prevention. At this time, what's your guidance overall regarding burnout prevention as it pertains to certain areas? And I'll kind of break my question up into multiple questions at this time. But right now, if we can talk about how to integrate self-care as it pertains to boundaries and priorities as a means of preventing burnout. What does that look like? We mentioned learning to say no. Learning to say no, transition of our career as necessary. Where are some areas where we manage our priorities, or you have experienced setting those boundaries?
So I know that there is something that I like to do, and I've noticed that it's certainly evolved over, I would say, probably the past 5 or 6 years. But I like to do little check-ins with myself and ask myself if this is still where I feel that I want to be. Is this where I feel that my career is moving? Is this still a role that I feel I'm not only feeling like I belong in, but that I'm providing, that I'm filling well. So, in some cases, so I've actually moved from inpatient case management because that was not serving me well. It was getting to the close to that burnout period, and moved into a role where I could still continue to work with clients in a medical sort of capacity alongside medical professionals, but to actively try to make more changes in the way they receive healthcare. So that feels like that was a good evolution in my career. But then I'm constantly checking in. Is this still the right fit for me? Is this the right direction? Am I filling my role well as well? So I'm trying to set a little bit of those maybe boundaries and limitations on myself as well. Going back to saying, that I can't do everything. I can't do this job and that job and that job and that job, even though I might want to. Do I need to let one thing go in order to do something that is a better fit for me?
Lauren, that's great. I think that it's so many things that you're balancing, right? Like, I love those check-ins. So I think I'm gonna steal that. So I hope you're okay with that. But I love the check-ins with yourself. But I also think that, like, it's so much that you're balancing. So let's say you're doing 4 things that are associated with the field of social work, and financially it feels really good because you're able to take care of your household, and you're able to do fun stuff. And in your check-in, it's kind of like, oh, I don't know. I know I feel a little burnt out. I know I feel a little overwhelmed. But it looks good right here because, social work sometimes is not as lucrative as other professions. Mm-hmm. And so how would you balance that part of it? Like, when you think about it may meet one need, but be overwhelming in the mental health area for yourself, and finding that balance.
So that is definitely, because you hit the nail on the head with that one. It's like doing 4 different things. And this is something that I actually speak with my social work supervisor about quite frequently, is lucratively, financially, it's a wonderful thing to have all of these different roles and to have extra income. But that really that gets you closer to burnout, and recognizing it's been 3 months since I've actually gotten to hang out with friends and do something socially and do something to fill myself. So, at that point, during some of these check-ins, I have had to say, what is it that I need to let go? And how is that in reality going to affect me? Is there something that I can move around financially that maybe will allow me to let some of these things go? Or also, do I need to, as a primary, maybe the largest chunk of my time is spent with a 9-to-5 kind of job. Does that 9-to-5 job need to be paying me more? Mm-hmm. And do I need to either go ahead and say that I need more to stay in this role, or do I need to seek out a role that will provide more?
That's good.
I think you just hit the nail on the head for anybody who's worked at an agency, right? And I think that's why we lose people. Yeah. And I'll bring it back to kind of a little bit about that macro piece and society and the limited resources that our 9-to-5 jobs have to pay us, right? So it again becomes even a bigger issue of, how do we walk away, because that's what we've been kind of forced to do. And that's part of why we can't retain social workers in agencies. So I just think that was a really, really good point. And it's something that we all struggle with. Yeah. And again, as a profession, we gotta look at how we advocate to be valued, I
Absolutely.
suppose, but on a very higher level, because who is funding all that work? Who is funding our agencies? So
Absolutely.
I'm in with that.
People who are not doing the work, Robin, are funding it, unfortunately.
And making all the decisions about what is care and what is not care,
Absolutely.
which is also part of the stress of which we all live under.
Mhm.
So, is there anything we can do on the macro level to help prevent burnout?
Mhm.
I can think of so many things on the macro level. Alicia, I'm just going to go ahead and call in some of our conversations that we've had in regard to healthcare, but the recognition of the social work contribution in healthcare is greatly undervalued. And one thing that I'm not sure if we've all heard this. I know I've heard it quite a bit. The market value of a social worker determines what most agencies will cap a pay at, will cap a salary at. So there is certainly that. How on a macro level do we change the market value of our social workers? There is that. The other thing that comes to mind is make therapy included in insurance. Give us some therapy so that we can actually get it ourselves, since we provide it to so many people.
Such a good point. Woo!
No, it's really important. I think like legislative, I've learned so much, I think in the last year or two, just about, bills and how certain bills are labeled certain ways, and then other topics will get added underneath of it, and you'll never know because I can speak for Sharonda. Sharonda doesn't always read through a 200-page bill to figure out what is identifying, but sometimes that needs to happen. So really having social workers, on Capitol Hill, in there being able to be change agents and being able to communicate and advocate for the work that we do, because we are like financially, it's just not comparable in any avenue as it pertains to a social worker. Even when you're thinking as a therapist, it's still, that is a lucrative, but it's not to the level of where it could be to support the work that we're doing, which then will lessen the amount of work we have to do, which makes us more effective. It's like this nice little circle that, is going over and over and over again. And ultimately it leads us, when we don't intentionally self-care, it leads us to burnout. And then we might leave the profession, or, we might have medical issues that kind of happen with us. Can't tell you how many people I know out on FMLA right now. And that was my eye-opening moment. It was like, I'm over here, giving 175%. And I noticed other people going on FMLA, and we send them a card and they hire somebody else. So I was like, you have to take care of yourself, because the work is going to get done, whether it gets done by myself or it gets done by someone else. So yes, on Capitol Hill.
And for Eileen, you did leave the profession. It's so interesting that, to me, you went into a profession that I would have thought would have burnt you out so much more. So I'm wondering, because you have you're unionized or anything, is there anything like that you feel is different in your field now that we could learn from on that level?
Yeah, the flexibility that nursing offers that social work doesn't, because we are like a team base now as nursing. There's 15, 20 of us per section as a nurse. So if I can't get everything handled, hey, no problem. I got 17 other me's that can jump in and help. When I was a social worker, it was me, and that was it. And if I didn't get it done, I'm SOL, because I'm the only one that can do it.
Right.
I'm alone, and if I don't get it done, oh my God, and that added self pressure that I put on myself. I don't have to do that now as a nurse, because there's more of me. Yeah, I can compartmentalize it more of I'm giving my 12 hours and then I can go, versus, oh my God, if I don't get this done today, I have to come back tomorrow, and it's going to be the same person having the same need, and I got to do it tomorrow. And at least with nursing, because we do the 12 on, 12 off, you get, chunks of work and more time off, versus 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. You go home, you go to sleep, you wake up, you come back to work. You're there. It feels like you're there all the time with social work, because you're 8 to 5, you go home, you have chores, dinner, and go to bed. you don't have any days off. You get 2 days off a week,
Yeah.
and that's it. Nursing, you get 4 days off a week sometimes. That's enough to recover. You can recoup from that.
Wow.
But it feels more like a team.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's really, really insightful, things that I've never thought of. So, because we do, it's always usually one social worker and that's that. And we're all carrying 15 different million clients versus one of the things we need to start thinking about is teamwork, team sharing. I think that's amazing because we know the client base isn't going to get smaller.
No, it's not.
No. It's going to grow with
How
the
do
aging
we incorporate
population,
that?
our mental health needs, all of it. Yeah, with our financial needs in our economy right now, absolutely, it's going to grow.
Yeah. Ooh. We better start caring for ourselves.
Immediately. Awesome.
Okay. Let's see.
Awesome.
I guess my next question would, and we've talked a lot about how we can support each other or integrate more aspects of not feeling like you're the Lone Ranger and having to execute your duties. But what does career advocacy look like at this point as it pertains to burnout prevention? And how can we move forward in calling for support, calling for that type of support within our profession?
I don't know if outreach is the right word for it, but coming from the social work side, I understand that, Alicia, you are more than a ride home with Uber, and that's all you can do as a social worker. You provide transportation home, and that's all you do. I know there's a lot more within your field, your scope that you can do, that you can prevent them from coming in next time because you can coordinate their aftercare for them so they don't have to come back to the ER every single time. But so many of even my fellow nurses, they have no idea what social work can do. They view social work like society does. You're here to take my babies or to give me food stamps, and that's all you're here for. They don't understand the mental health piece. They don't understand the community outreach, the kind of sorting, systems navigation of trying to figure out how to meet your needs that you have once you're out of the hospital or out of the office or whatever. They don't seem to understand what social work can do, so they don't call on social work when it's appropriate until it's to that critical stage. And then, then you're one social worker and you can't fix the 500 things that have gone wrong for this client because they weren't called in when it was manageable. Now they're here when the house is on fire and it's kind of late. And then they're going to have a negative view of social work because, I called you and you couldn't fix all 500 of their problems. Well, no, but if you'd been involved from the start, you could have helped them and prevented the house from catching on fire. So I think outreach or team building, I guess, with that piece, I don't know how,
Not to get too far off topic, but Eileen, you just spoke to what I feel like I keep screaming at people is don't wait until it's a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Don't wait until it's a crisis. And that's exactly what I see over and over again, that many of our systems are set up as reactionary as opposed to preventative.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, certainly healthcare, but many systems as well. Our housing in my area, if an individual is possibly going to lose their housing, they cannot get assistance until they lose their housing. Right. So it's very reactionary. As social workers, were people to really get an understanding of the perspective and the theories and the systems that we try to utilize in our work, we would see a more preventative measure in so many systems to keep people, because it is far more expensive and hard to just take the homeless system to get back into housing once you have lost housing.
Yep.
So it makes no sense to wait, but that's the way so many of these systems are set up, is because they are not run by social workers. They have social workers in them, but they're not at the top. They're not leading a lot of these. So putting social workers more in the lead, Doing things exactly like this comes to mind, though, giving social workers more of a voice. Sometimes when I go to research or to look at what another social worker's perspective is, I have to dig and dig and dig just to find articles, podcasts, YouTube videos that aren't related to getting just a test accomplished. They're all related to passing a test, but they're not talking about things like self-care or macro practice or getting social workers into politics.
Right.
I would like to see more of that, and I think that would be very helpful.
Absolutely.
And it definitely
Totally
would
agree.
promote
Totally agree.
that
That's
career advocacy.
yeah. Sorry, Alicia.
You're fine. I was just saying that it definitely would promote that career advocacy and give us that voice. When we think of intentional self-care, oftentimes, we do stop at the Mannies and Pedis, but in actuality, educating interdisciplinary teams about what we actually do will help prevent things from reaching a point of crisis at times, because it will get us involved earlier on in processes. It often is difficult for us to chime in when it's a full blazing fire. What if we could get in there beforehand when we're just seeing sparks of the issue and go ahead and put it out early on? So I agree with what both of you ladies are saying, that it's important that we intentionally advocate for our career as a whole by educating the masses, if possible, and in educating our teams that we work with, because so many people, so many of the decision makers are not social workers, and they're not fully aware of what we do. So thank you.
And I think what stood out for me, kind of have like my light bulb moment while y'all were speaking, is you're very right. Our field works in a very reactive way and not proactive. So that means that we're working in crisis mode all the time. And so when you think about your brain and how your brain works, like we want our brain to be calm and have that thinking part of our brain on so we can process. But when we flip our lids, when, that crisis phase happens and we're just working off of basic instincts, fight, flight, or fear, that means us as social workers, we're working in fight, flight, or fear all day, every day. That is so draining to every part of our body, our minds, our spirit. But it's because right now our profession is set up that way. It's set up for us to be in crisis mode. Okay, let me hurry up and figure out how I can find housing. How can I find this? And you have your clients sitting there crying because they're sleeping in their car because they don't have any other option. And you're trying to help them, and then it's the end of the day and you still haven't been able to find a way to connect them with the resource. How do you go home and turn that off? It's like when your client and their children are now sleeping in a car until you get back to work the next day. So that advocacy, that, being able to teach, and some of that even happening on the collegiate level, for these new social workers, teaching them, don't be scared to advocate for yourself. Don't be scared to speak about what social workers do and how social workers can be effective before the crisis. How can social workers be effective when everything seems like it's going good and the crisis is 6 months down the line? How can we step in at that point and provide that skill set? So that was my light bulb moment. So thank you, ladies, for giving that to me.
Absolutely, I agree, and it's about the education. We all have to be committed to educating new social workers, because obviously we didn't get that. None of us got that, but we're now in a role where we can provide that and see how important it is to be thinking about these things not 10 years down in, but while you're getting that degree. It has to be prioritized because it's such a big part of what we do every day.
Absolutely.
I'm loving this conversation, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us on too, because this is a great conversation. I'm enjoying this and learning a lot from all of you ladies.
It's awesome when you can be with like-minded individuals and have a fun conversation. But honestly, things like I've gotten a lot of nuggets out of this conversation I want to take with me in my role, since I will have a handle on, on a collegiate world and being able to shape the next generation. So I'm taking all my little nuggets. I can't wait to spill it to them and give them these great tips for them to be the next generation of supporting our society. Awesome.
And changing our society. Don't forget, we got to change it too, so that they're not sitting in their car and we have to worry about them, but what we work towards getting them into a safe place where they can have a good decent life to begin
Yeah,
with.
that's right.
Sorry, had to add that in.
Oh, that's good. So I think we have one last question. I think Robin's going to kick to us as we're wrapping up.
Let's see where we were working on. Oh, the impact. Are we talking about our impact of the social boundaries? I'm sorry.
You're
Or
fine.
that.
I think we're going to talk a little bit about life-work balance.
That's what I thought. Okay, sorry. So sorry, guys. Okay, well, that we have now the mystery of life for I think almost every profession, but bringing it back to social work, and the special needs that we have, and what do you guys think? What do you do for work-life balance?
I take time off.
Very fair.
Very
Super
fair.
important. That's back to that idea that we only work. If we take off, that's a bad thing. And that's not okay.
Yeah,
That's
and-
part of the research literature too. The idea that that's not okay. And I love that you said that, Elaine.
Back when I was a social worker and I was the only one, there's the additional level of you can't take time off because no one is going to be there to pick up the ball
That's
when
right.
you drop it. You have to be there or lives are on the line. I mean, it's, at least as a nurse, I know, hey, I can take a week. I'm in the middle of my week off right now. If I need to take a week off, I can do that. When you're the only social worker for the entire unit, no, you can't take time off like that. Because if you do, I mean, they would end up in their car. I mean, what would you do? That would be on you. You took time off. You should have been at work. And that guilt, self-guilt of, oh no, did I cause this?
Yeah,
You know, it's crushing. You have to be able to take time off.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think
How
that's
about you, Lauren? Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine, Robin. Go ahead. I'll chime in after you.
No, I was just going to ask Lauren, but Sharonda, go ahead.
So my only point was, to me, this is still more teachable lessons. So you think about when you interview for a new job and they're like, what questions do you have? And a lot of times we don't have no questions. It's like, you just happen to be working. But to me, that's a question. What's the work-life balance look like at your job? Like, do I have opportunities to take off? If I'm unable to complete my role for the day, what does that look like? And I think teaching the next generation, but also teaching ourselves that it's okay for us to ask these questions. An interview is not just one-sided, it's two-sided. I want to make sure it's a good fit for me, just like you want to make sure I'm a good fit for you. So I'm gonna let y'all know I ask all the questions. I have my little notebook. I'm glad you asked. Let me pull this out. Let me ask these questions, because who wants to get into a job? And certain jobs are just not a good fit for everybody, and that's okay. And if it's not a good fit for me, even though it might be high paying, I would rather look long-term towards my mental health. To make sure my mental health is healthy. So that was a really, really good point.
It's going to sound a little bit like my work-life balance is not so great, but I promise you it actually is. So one of the things, so I don't have kids. I do have 2 lovely cats and a dog that, give me a lot of space when I need it. So, I don't have to keep up with their needs. But one thing that I do find that is really helpful for me is I do have a lot of like varying hobbies and interests, but I love to actually volunteer. I feel like giving back is actually a good balance for me. It helps me to go from my job role, but also to actually give something back. So and I don't work more than my 40 hours. When it is time to be done, it's time to be done. Exactly. Peace out. I'm good. But that does leave you with being the only social worker. That does leave me with a little bit of that ethical conundrum. Like, now maybe somebody's being left high and dry. So having that opportunity in my free time to be able to volunteer, to give back to my community in the ways that I'm able to do so, that actually helps me very much to balance some of those emotions as well. So I do find that I do quite a bit of that in my community. And I also try very much to get involved with more agencies that can offer that as well. And then I really, really allow myself to just do nothing sometimes.
Yeah.
I had to turn on a completely mindless TV show and eat a whole tub of Ben and Jerry's and be like, I don't even care. Today is just my day and we're not doing anything. And sometimes that's exactly what I need. So.
Lauren, that's good. That giving yourself permission just to be, right? It's so hard. It feels so uncomfortable at first, but once you get past that uncomfortable place, it's so freeing just to sit down and say, I'm gonna watch some TV. So I think those were awesome points. Awesome, thank you. Awesome. So as we're wrapping up, I just have one final question, unless someone had something else. Alicia, like you were getting ready to say something? No? Okay.
Go ahead.
So as we're moving beyond.
Sorry, I'm such a talker, but I just have to, it's like I love how we put all these things like the boundaries, finances, career advocacy, and we've kind of broke them all down into these compartments. But as true social workers, I just have to say my takeaway is how we pulled all those things into a systematic, like our point of view was so systems oriented and we couldn't separate them out. We kind of just put them all together. So that's kind of what I really appreciated about this conversation. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Robin, all your points are amazing. So don't apologize for sharing and giving it. We want to hear it. That was awesome. I just had one last question for our guests. So like as we're moving beyond Manny and Pedis, what last comment would you want someone to hear? If there had to be a statement that was just like your statement, ... your name, how would you want to leave that on our podcast? And to new social workers, old social workers, burnt out social workers who have it together, what would be your lasting statement to leave with them? And I know this wasn't on our questions, sorry.
Amazing though, I love it, but hard.
Good
hard.
one. That is a good one. I really think that, and this is because I swear if you asked me in 3 weeks, it would probably be different, but go with the moment, right? Your voice matters. Speak up. When you see something that you feel like needs to be addressed, speak up because your voice matters.
I love that. That's awesome. And it's true. Thank you.
You have one of the hardest but most necessary and most rewarding jobs out there. Find your group. Find your support group. You need one.
That's good, Eileen. Thank you for that too. It's funny that both of y'all statements were self-care. Like maybe not intentionally, but it had a self-care piece to it that would help somebody in the field kind of push on and move on. That's awesome. Alicia or Robin, did y'all have anything else before we wrap up our segment?
No, but I just want to take a moment to say thank you very, very much to both of you ladies again. I really appreciate this conversation, and I just look forward to sharing it with others.
Absolutely. And I ditto what Alicia said. Thank y'all so much. Y'all didn't have to do this, and y'all jumped right on when you were asked, and having these real honest conversations, Lauren, like you said, needs to happen more often, so that others can see things from our lens and perspective, and know that social workers are not just baby takers and the person that you call in at the last minute, that there's a lot more to our profession. And with that being said, it also means that the workers, the people who are doing the work, the change agents need to take time intentionally to take care of themselves.
Yes. This was so much fun. Thank you.
We're going to put together some resources that we've been researching on exactly some of the things you were saying, Lauren, like the podcast.
Yes.
The tools, all those things we can kind of help, whatever we can do on our own little level. So we're going to put that together for you and our audience, and we'll make sure to get them out there, because I agree with you. There's so much to be said and not enough is being said.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, as we wrap up this segment, We're going to jump off for another commercial break, and we'll come back with a wrap up with Robin, Alicia, and Sharonda. Awesome. Bye.
Hi, everybody. I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you the way I have learned to take care of myself and what self-care means to me. When I started out as a social worker, I don't even think there was a word self-care. And certainly what it kind of grew into is, yeah, I will take a mani and pedi. I'll take that time, and that's going to help me feel better in dealing with the stress levels and the trauma that we, deal with on a daily basis. When I would go home, I probably dealt with my stress levels through eating and drinking alcohol. And it culminated in a weight gain that I was I was 115 pounds heavier than I am today. And that went on for quite a long time in my career. And also the way I dealt with it at work, I didn't reach out for good supervision or really sharing what I was feeling, but rather I just thought, oh, I have to work harder. Like I can't keep up, so I'm going to keep working harder. And I think that was a really negative way to take care of myself, and certainly not intentional and reflective and checking in with myself or others who could have helped me. The way I did eventually take care of myself is I got diagnosed with a lot of medical issues, so I had to. And I highly recommend that you don't go that route. So I did end up going on a journey of weight loss, and that took about 2 years of my life, but I now know how to take care of myself, to listen to my body and to my mind and seek out help when I need it. I found that working with our team here, our group, was amazing because we had very similar journeys on a certain level and coming from all different places. And I really appreciate my podcast members here to hear their side of the story and understand what they've done. And again, I only encourage you guys to reach outward when you need to. And don't think that working harder or ignoring what you need to deal with is ever going to get better, because coming from someone who's gone now the gamut of a 25-year career, it will catch up with you and it will burn you out. So again, I hope you guys get something out of my story in terms of taking care of yourselves, and looking forward to our profession taking this seriously and taking our emotional well-being, our psychological well-being, and our physical well-being seriously. Thanks.
That was amazing. That was such great information from our two amazing experts. What did y'all think?
Amazing.
I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was excellent. They brought out some amazing points.
Absolutely.
I especially, one thought comes to mind for me as Eileen was talking about how in nursing, she has a certain level of support with her fellow nurses. And I think Robin mentioned how nurses are unionized.
That's right.
And Lauren said, our voices need to be heard. Well, we have NASW, and I don't know if many people consider becoming members of that or how we can get involved. But I thought about how our voices can be heard on that macro level and even on the individual level as well. But just equipping ourselves with that support system that Eileen also mentioned would be awesome. So I'm really impressed with those ladies.
I was too. What I also think about is, we're kind of in our bubble right now in the DSW program at Simmons, and it was really nice you found these two social workers out there, one nurse or one in nursing now, but like they're thinking about all these things, and it was really grounding for me not to be like super highbrow and be like, oh, this is only happening at our doctoral program. No, it's happening for everybody. So I really appreciated understanding that those issues are a concern for everyone, and that, how do we make sure to work together? Because academics are great, but if we don't work together with practitioners out there in the real world, which is like what we all really do, like we have to make those connections and work together. So I kind of really got that from this too. Like we don't have to be in our academic bubble.
That's right. And I think I had like two major light bulb moments during the conversation. I think my first one was the conversation about who are you surrounding yourself with, both Eileen and oh my God, I'm having a brain fart. How am I having a brain fart? What was I speaking? Lauren, yes. Lauren, if you're watching this, I'm so sorry. But they both kind of spoke to the fact of being intentional for what your circle looks like and who you're surrounding yourself with, and where it worked one way for one, which was supporting herself with people outside the profession. It worked a different way for Lauren, where it was the people in the profession that was supportive for her. So that point stood out to me, that is very personal, right? And is very intentional in what that looks like as a support system. And that second light bulb moment for me was the fact that we are always working in crisis modes in many of our professions in social work. And because we're working in that mode, we're in that basic instinct. Our brain is always not having that thinking part on. So you're always in that stress mode, and that has internal issues for ourselves that manifests itself externally. And so those were two amazing moments for me that I was able to take out of our podcast. So it's not just great for everybody else, it's great for us too, to be able to hear and talk through some of this.
Actually, and I agree. Also bringing it back to that social justice piece, that this isn't just individual. We deal with communities. There's racial, class, gender. We're dealing with such marginalization and oppression, and the communities are always under attack, right? So it's kind of like that same level. And how do we work with our communities to help them not self-care, right? Because if we can't do it, like, how do we empower and listen to our communities and remember what they're under, the kind of stress levels that they're under, and making sure we don't just focus on us, but back to our clients and our community.
When you look at those societal norms and how that manifests itself in certain areas, think about if we're thinking we're working in crisis mode all the time, they're actually in crisis mode all the time. Like living, like we do at least get to try to take it off when we go home at night. It's 24/7 for some of our populations. And if they're not practicing self-care, and if we can't show them, if we can't be able to provide to them what that looks like, then they're also in fight, flight, or freeze. They're also in basic instinct all the time. And so everybody's working into this crisis place. So I agree with you, Robin, like just being able to not only practice it for ourselves, but kind of practice what we preach whenever we're trying to work with our clients in the different societies.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's awesome, guys.
Okay, Queen.
Shutting it down. All I can say is wow. What an amazing episode of Moving Beyond Manis and Pedis with Robin, Alicia, and Sharonda. We learned about self-care. We learned how to define it. We've learned how to implement self-care within our lives, not only from our amazing guests today, but also from our hosts, Robin, Alicia, and Sharonda. As always, we will end our podcast with taking a moment to take a few deep breaths, relax ourselves so we can go about our day. So I want you to close your eyes. Take a deep breath in, and we're going to hold that for 1, 2, 3, 4, and release it to the world. 2, 3, 4. We'll see y'all guys next week.